Okay, so how did attachment trauma contribute to who you were then and who you are today, and why? And so, as I mentioned in the last video, it affects us on multiple layers. And so, looking at that in a nutshell is really easy. But let's look at for a moment some of the ways that trauma shows up in our bodies and in our actions as children. And so, a lot of childhood illnesses, mental illnesses, ADHD, ADD, oppositional defiant disorder, let's see, anxiety, anger. There are tons of ways that trauma shows up in us as children. We don't know how to regulate. We weren't taught to regulate. And most of us have been in a childhood home where we are being gaslit. And what I mean by gaslighting is gaslighting is when somebody creates your experience for you. It's a distressing experience. And then when you show signs of distress, they blame you rather than looking at the fact that they caused some of that stress. So for parents, they will put us in situations where we are beyond our capability of staying calm, right? We're children. We're just learning to manage our emotions. Nobody's taught us how. And now we are being put in situations that are beyond what our brain can comprehend. And we are expected to behave as healthy adults in that situation. When we do act out, when we have a stress, when we feel an emotion, when we have a reaction to the way we're being treated, we get treated worse. We have a reaction, we get told, don't have that reaction. It's all in your head. You're overreacting. You're causing this. This is your fault, right? Even though it's not. We're being told something is wrong with us for having a very obvious outcome to the way that we're being treated. But we're being told that it's our fault and that something is wrong with us and that we may even be causing pain to those that are harming us. It's a completely twisted way of living. And you end up being so confused as a kid that you're likely either you have shut down completely, you go in whenever you're yelled at, you go totally quiet, you stopped fighting for yourself, you already gave up. Or you become the kid that fights back. You become the kid that will always like try to fight for themselves and just make it worse. Either way, it's what you had to do in order to survive the situation that you are in. Other ways that this shows up in kids is lying. Huge, where you see children lie when they're afraid of trauma. They're afraid to get in trouble. And so lying, um, how does it affect us then? It affects our memories, then it affects our self esteem. It affects us on so many levels. We have a hard time connecting with anyone. We have a hard time trusting adults, especially if we have been harmed by adults outside of our family. Um, and then how does it affect us now? In very similar ways. Difficult times having healthy relationships, finding yourself in the unhealthy relationship patterns, whether that be with friends or lovers, and with family, repeating the same kinds of patterns. You see it in illness. Trauma shows up in illness all the time. Um, Coming up soon, we will talk about the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, which directly links childhood experience with illnesses and negative outcomes as adults. Trauma affects us on every level. It affects the way we feel about ourselves. It affects the way that we see the world. It affects the way we believe the world sees us. And it affects us on every level that you can possibly imagine. So, how does it affect us? Biologically, it affects us through neurochemicals, hormones change, blood sugar can change. It affects our whole system. Physically, it affects our lymph, it affects our blood pressure, and it affects our hearts and our lungs, and pretty much every part of our system is affected in some way by stress, which is really what trauma and childhood trauma is it's constant stress on our bodies. It affects us spiritually. We don't know where we are in the world. We don't know who we are. We always feel lost. We feel like the black sheep. We feel like we don't have a place. We doubt if we're safe. We doubt if the world is safe. Often don't have faith. Um, we pretty much have given up. We feel like we can't even try to attach meaning because that would just taint it. And, having all of the experiences that we've had, it's hard to believe that there's a purpose to life. And so it damages us on this spiritual level, on a soul level that helps us just not feel like we are a spirit and that we are connected to anything. It affects us emotionally, horribly emotionally, leading to depression and anxiety and anger. It affected us then and now emotionally. It affects the way that we respond to people. It affects the emotions that we're having and how intense they are. It affects our ability to manage our emotions, to claim our own emotions, and to be able to separate where our emotions start and others stop. Emotions are very tricky. They're a very tricky concept to begin with. And when they're tainted by attachment trauma and fear and communication, especially when someone's beating you and saying that they're doing it because they love you, when they are hurting you and calling that caring, when they are controlling you and manipulating you and telling you that that's what love feels like, right? All of those things are completely twisted up. And when we begin to have a feelings as an adult, they're all tainted still. They're super confused and confusing. It affects us mentally. It makes us have thoughts that are horrific. Most of the time, our worst bully is right in our own brain. We are the ones doing this to ourselves. These voices, there are voices we will continue to hear, the critics in our lives coming through as us as though we're trying to protect ourselves when it's really just fear-based crap from other people being regurgitated by our subconscious mind. It messes with our ability to remember things, details while the trauma is happening. It is extremely difficult to categorize and make sense of timelines and allow your brain, because when you're in fight or flight, we do not have access to our higher thinking brain. So it is affecting us mentally. We can't think about things. We aren't able to think positively. We can't think clearly because our brain gets in our way. We end up believing things about ourselves, about humanity, about other people, and about relationships that are just downright wrong, lies that we have been told. It affects us mentally in our ability to remember other information. It affects our ability to have neuroplasticity, which is jumping from different, um, you know, uh, different things and changing our brain and switching from different games and back and forth. It affects our cognitive ability. It affects everything. And those emotions in turn are affecting our biology. So it is a circle, and trauma affects us then and now on all of these levels. And it leads us to the ways that we are still hurting ourselves.